Mr. Mercado and Richard Carey.
हम लोग कहाँ कहाँ चलेंगे?
बताएंगे हमें. They work in two separate places, I see, said Poirot, halting. Mr. Reiter had been doing his photography on an outlying portion of the main excavation. A little distance away from us, a second swarm of men were coming and going in baskets. That's where they call the deep cut, I explained. They don't find much there, nothing but rubbishly broken pottery. But Dr. Leitner says it's very interesting. So I suppose it must be. Let us go there. We walked together slowly, for the sun was hot. Mr. Mercado was in command. We saw him below us talking to the foreman. An old man like a tortoise who wore a tweed coat over his long striped cotton gown. Mr. Mercado ji the niche the. It was a little difficult to get down to them as there was only a narrow path or a stair or basket boys were going up and down constantly. And they always seemed to be as blind as bats and never
mercado
to
कौन थे?
Mercado the na Mrs. Mercado,
अच्छा अच्छा
Mr.
हाँ ठीक
Mercado,
है.
and never to think of getting out of the way. As I followed Poirot, he said suddenly over his shoulder, "Is Mr. Mercado right-handed or left-handed?" Now that was an extraordinary question, if you like. I thought a minute then. Right-handed, I said decisively. Poirot didn't condescend to explain. He just went on, and I followed him. Mr. Mercado seemed rather pleased to see us. His long, melancholy face lit up. Monsieur Poirot pretended to an interest in archaeology, and I'm sure he couldn't really have failed, but Mr. Mercado responded at once. मतलब आर्कियोल ने आर्कियोलॉजी के कुछ पूछा, मिस्टर मर्कादो ने कुछ जवाब दिया. He explains that they had already cut down through 12 levels of house occupation. 12 levels of house occupation पे cut down किया गया था.
12 लेवल की.
12. We are now definitely in the 4th millennium. मतलब 4th millennium BC में वो लोग थे, 400 BC के आसपास थे. He said with enthusiasm. I always thought a millennium was in the future, the time when everything comes right. Mr. Mercado pointed out belts of ashes. Now his hand did shake. I wondered if he might possibly have malaria. मैंने कहा भाई ash वैश मिली तो हो सकता है क्या मलेरिया हो. And explain how the pottery changed the character and about burials and how they had one level almost entirely composed of infant burials, poor little things. And about flexed position and orientation, which seemed to mean the way the bones were lying. अलग अलग तरीके से जो bones थी पड़ी थी वो कैसे burials का होता था. And then suddenly, just as he was stooping down to pick up a kind of flint knife that was lying with some pots in a corner, he leapt into the air with a wild yell. मतलब एक कोई नहीं था. He spun round to find me and Poirot staring at him in astonishment. He clapped his hand to his left arm. Something stung me like a red hot needle. मतलब लेफ्ट आर्म पे बोला कुछ बाएं हाथ में मेरे को रेड हॉट नीडल की तरह. Immediate Caparo was galvanized into energy. Quick, Moncho, let us see. Nurse Lutheran, I came forward. He seized Mr. Mercado's arm and deftly rolled back the sleeve of the khaki shirt to the shoulder. There, said Mr. Mercado, pointing. About 3 inches up below the shoulder, there was a minute prick from which the blood was oozing. छोटा सा prick था जिसमें खून निकल रहा था. Curious, said Poirot. He peered into the rolled-up sleeve. I can see nothing. It was an ant, perhaps. Better put on a little iodine, I said. कुछ iodine ले लो. I always carry an iodine pencil with me and I whipped it out and applied it. But I was a little absent-minded as I did so, for my attention had been caught by something quite different. Mr. Mercado's arm, all the way up the forearm to the elbow, was marked all over by tiny punctures. पूरा forearm तक था tiny punctures there. I knew well enough what they were. Marks of a hypodermic needle. एक needle था. Mr. Mercado rolled down his sleeve again and recommenced his explanations. Monsieur Poirot listened but didn't try to bring the conversation round to the Leibners. In fact, he didn't ask Mr. Mercado anything at all. Mr. Mercado से उसने कुछ पूछा ही नहीं. Presently we say goodbye we said goodbye to Mr. Mercado and climbed up the path again.
Hmm.
It was neat that. Did you not think so? My companion said. Neat? I asked. Monsieur Poirot took something from behind the lapel of his coat and surveyed it affectionately. To my surprise, I saw that it was a long, sharp drawing needle with a blob of sealing wax, making it into a pin. मतलब एक बड़ी सी नीडल थी उस पर सीलिंग वैक्स था पिन सा बना मरकादो पे लगा था Sipara, did you do that? It was a stinging insect, yes, and very neatly I did too. Do you not think so? You did not see me? That was true enough. I never saw him do it, and I'm sure Mr. Mercado hadn't suspected. He must have been quick as lightning. जल्दी से उसने वो नीडल से वो खून निकाला और खून क्यों निकाला पता
बेटे
नहीं
एक बात हम बताएं तुम जो यहाँ बैठ के बड़ो ज़्यादा अच्छा समझ आता है
ओह दैट्स फाइन हाँ ठीक है But Monsieur Pyro, why? I asked. He answered me by another question. Did you notice anything, sister? He asked. I nodded my head slowly. Hypodermic marks, I said. Hypodermic marks. So now we know something about Mr. Mercado, said Pyro. I suspected, but I did not know. It is always necessary to know. And you don't care how you set about it, I thought, but didn't say. Pyro suddenly clapped his hand to his pocket. Alas, I dropped my handkerchief down there. I concealed the pin in it. I'll get it for you, I said and hurried back. I got the feeling, you see, by this time that Monsieur Pyro and I were the doctor and nurse in charge of a case. At least it was more like an operation and he was a surgeon. Perhaps I ought to say so, but in a queer way, I was beginning to enjoy myself. Like sort of a case सा है मतलब उसके hypodermic marks हैं इसका this thing. I remember just after I had finished my training, I went to a case in a private house and the need for an immediate operation arose. And the patient's husband was cranky about nursing homes. He just wouldn't hear of his wife being taken to one. Said it had to be done in the house. Well, of course, it was just splendid for me. Nobody else to have to look in. I was in charge of everything, of course. I was terribly nervous. I thought of everything conceivable that the doctor could want, but even then I was afraid I might have forgotten something. You never knew with doctors, they ask absolutely anything sometimes. But everything went splendidly. I had each thing ready as he asked for it, and he usually told me I'd done first rate after it was over. And that's the thing most doctors won't bother to do. तो डॉक्टर ने बोला ये तो अब ये कह रही थी मैं sort of investigator मैं अप्परू के साथ थी. The GP was very nice too, and I ran the whole thing nice myself. The patient recovered too, so everybody was happy. But I felt rather the same now. In a way, Monsieur Poirot reminded me of that surgeon. He was the little man too, ugly.
कौन सा
Little man with a face like a monkey, but a wonderful surgeon. He knew instinctively just where to go. I've seen a lot of surgeons and I know with a lot of difference there is. Gradually, I had been growing a kind of confidence in Monsieur Poirot. I felt that he too knew exactly what he was doing, and I was getting to feel it was my job to help him, as you might say. ठीक है ना? To have forceps and the swabs all handy just when he wanted them. That's why it seemed just as natural for me to run off and look for his handkerchief as it would have been to pick up a towel that a doctor had thrown on the floor. When I'd found it and got back, I couldn't see him at first. But at last I caught sight of him. He was sitting a little way from the mount talking to Mr. Carey. Mr. Carey's boy was standing near with a great big wrought thing with meters marked on it. But just at that moment he said something to the boy and the boy took it away. It seemed he had finished with it for the time being. I'd like to get this next bit quite clear. You see, I wasn't quite sure what Mr. Pyro did or didn't want me to do. He might, I mean, have sent me back for that handkerchief on purpose to get me out of the way. It was just like an operation over again. You've got to be careful to hand the doctor just what he wants and not what he doesn't want.
क्या हुआ
I mean, suppose you gave him the artery forceps in the wrong moment and were late with them at the right moment. Thank goodness I know my work in the theatre well enough. I'm not likely to make mistakes there, but in this business I was the really rawest of the raw little probationers. And so I had to be particularly careful not to make any silly mistakes. Of course, I didn't for one moment imagine that Monsieur Pyro didn't want me to hear what he and Mr. Carey were saying. Right? Was saying. But he might have thought he'd get Mr. Carey to talk better if I wasn't there. Logic क्या है इसका? Now, I don't want anybody to get it into their heads that I'm the kind of woman who goes about eavesdropping on private conversations. I won't do such a thing. Not for a moment, not however much I wanted to. And what I mean is that if it had been a private conversation, I wouldn't for a moment have done what, as a matter of fact, I actually did do. As I looked at it, I was in a privileged position. After all, you hear many a thing when a patient's coming around after an anesthesia. The patient won't want you to hear it. And usually has no idea that you have heard it. But the fact remains you do hear it. I just took it that Mr. Carey was the patient. He'd be none of the worse for what he didn't know about. And if you think that I was just curious, well, I admit I was curious. I didn't want to miss anything I could help. All this is just leading up to the fact that I turned aside and went by a roundabout way up the big dump until I was a foot from where they were, but concealed from them by the corner of the dump. And if anyone says it was dishonorable, I just beg to disagree. Nothing ought to be hidden from the nurse in charge of the case, though of course it's the doctor to say what shall be done. Interesting. I don't know, of course, what Monsieur's line of approach had been, but by the time I had got there, he was aiming straight for the bullseye, so to speak. Nobody appreciates Dr. Leitner's devotion to his wife more than I do, he was saying. But it is often the case that one learns more about a person from their enemies than from their friends. You suggest that their faults are more important than their virtues, said Mr. Carey. His tone was dry and ironic. Undoubtedly, when it comes to murder, it seems odd that, as far as I know, nobody has yet been murdered for having been too perfect a character. इतनी परफेक्ट कि भैया मार दिया, मसीह पैरो ने कहा. कोई तो फॉल्ट है. और एक आदमी का जो है उसका जो है दोस्तों से ज़्यादा उसके एनिमी से पता लगता है. एंड इट परफेक्शन इज अनडाउटेडली एन इरिटेटिंग थिंग. और परफेक्शन जो है बहुत इरिटेटिंग होता है. I'm afraid I'm hardly the right person to help you, said Mr. Carey. To be perfectly honest, Mrs. Leitner and I didn't hit off particularly well. I don't mean that we were in any sense of the word enemies, but we were not exactly friends. Mrs. Leitner was perhaps a shade jealous of my old friendship with her husband. तो ये बोला मामा, ये बोला कैरी कि भैया हो सकता है कि मिसेस लाइडनर को कुछ प्रॉब्लम हो मेरी फ्रेंडशिप with the husband. I, for my thought, although I admired her very much and thought she was an extremely attractive woman, was just a shade resentful of her influence over Leidna. As a result, we were quite polite to each other, but not intimate. Admirably explained, said Poirot. I could see their heads, and I saw Mr. Carey's turn sharply, as though something in Monsieur Poirot's detached tone struck him disagreeably. Monsieur Poirot went on. Was not Dr. Leitner distressed that you and his wife did not get on together better? क्या मिस्टर लाइडनर को इम्पैक्ट नहीं पड़ा कि मिसेस लाइडनर और मिस्टर कैरी की दोस्ती नहीं थी? Carey hesitated a minute before saying, Really, I'm not sure. He never said anything. I always hoped he didn't notice it. He was very wrapped up in his work, you know. So the truth, according to you, is that you did not like Mrs. Leitner. Carey shrugged his shoulders. I should have probably liked her very much if she hadn't been Leidner's wife. He laughed as though amused by his own statement. Poirot was arranging a little heap of broken potsherds. He said in a dreamy, faraway voice, I talked to Miss Johnson this morning. She admitted that she was prejudiced against Mrs. Lina and did not like her very much. Although she hastened to add that Mrs. Lina had always been charming to her. All quite true, I should say, said Carey. So I believe. Then I had a conversation with Mrs. Mercado. She told me at great length how devoted she had been to Mrs. Lina and how much she admired her. हर औरत जो थी बहुत admire करती थी, devoted थी this thing. That I didn't do. Carey made no answer to this, and after waiting a minute or two, Pirate went on. That I did not believe. Then I came to you, and that which you tell me, well, again, I do not believe. Carey stiffened. I could hear the anger, repressed anger in his voice. I really cannot help your beliefs or your disbeliefs, Monsieur Poirot. You have heard the truth and you can take it or leave it as far as I am concerned. Poirot did not get angry. Instead, he sounded particularly meek and depressed. Is it my fault what I do or do not believe? I have a sensitive ear, you know. And then there are always plenty stories going about rumors floating in the air. One listens and perhaps one learns something. And then there are stories. कुछ कहानियां हैं. Carey sprang to his feet. I could clearly see a little pulse that beat his temple. He looked simply splendid. So lean and so brown, and that wonderful jaw hard and square. I don't wonder a woman fell for that man. What stories? He said savagely. Poirot looked sideways. Perhaps you can guess the usual sort of story about you and Mrs. Lydna. What foul minds people have. Ne sais pas. They are like dogs. However deep you bury an unpleasantness, a dog will always root it up again. And you believe these stories? I am willing to be convinced of the truth, said Poirot gravely. I doubt if I'd know the truth if you had heard it. Carey laughed rudely. Try me and see, said Poirot, watching him. I will then. You shall have the truth. I hated Louis Lina, and that's the truth for you. I hated her like hell. तो ये हो गया, चैप्टर खत्म हो गया. ठीक है.
अभी तो ये बातें कर